Hill City. Thank you for joining us for this online conversation. As you know, we put these up on the weeks when we have house church on our schedule, so you can check out these conversations every first and third weekend of the month. And we are talking about the ongoing series in the book of Mark called Life with Jesus. So last time John preached about part of Mark chapter 2 and then went into Mark chapter 3. And John, do you want to give us a summary of what that message was about?
Yeah, so as we're continuing through Mark, we got through fasting, and then we got into this very interesting piece of Sabbath, because normally it's like, oh, it's this day of rest, but it's actually there's these pressures of the Pharisees saying you have to do Sabbath this way, and I guess there was a list. It was either 39 or 36 ways that you can't do Sabbath, and so here's a list, and then Jesus comes up and still he eats on the Sabbath, right? Or he
plucks the grain.
Yeah, he
right?
plucks the grain, which you're not supposed to pluck the grain, and then he also heals on the Sabbath. And instead of the result of a healing being like, wow, God is good, it's like, how can we kill this man? And a lot of times when we look through a passage, we're like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And in that one, it was the same way. Like, how can someone's heart be so stubborn that they could experience such good and then react with such like darkness? And then we say, oh, that must be them. That must be these people. But at the end of the day, a lot of times when I'm looking through or reading the Bible, like, those people are me.
Yeah.
Those people are me. We want to be the Jesus character and the disciple character, but most of the time I find myself, or a lot of times, as the crowd, like, oh, we'll just leave that alone. We'll let Jesus do his thing and stay out of it. Or I find myself in the piece of being the Pharisees, like, they didn't do that right.
Yeah.
They didn't do that right. So the whole sermon, just going there, we really talked about, like, how do we not get there? How do we not get there? And in Sabbath, as with many of the disciplines of Christ, it's a discipline. It's a training. I talked about jiu-jitsu, how bad I am. It's because I only do it like once a month at the end of the day. Like, I have opportunities to do it every week, but then I end up like eating sandwiches instead. It's like I have a teacher there, I have my group there, and then somehow I will coerce them to do something else. You know why? Because
you're sharing this.
Yes,
guys.
yes. Because jiu-jitsu is hard. Training your body and your mind to do something tough is really, really hard. And the second thing is, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes this disciplined way of life to like focus. Like, I have to get ready, I have to stretch, I have to think about it, I have to train my mind.
Yeah.
And in the same way, are we putting that same amount of effort into disciplining our lives around the way of Jesus? And I say it that way because, like, if we look at our lives and we wonder, why is the fruit of the Spirit lacking so much from my life?
Yeah.
And I would say, are we actually practicing any of the ways of Jesus so that the ground or the soil that Jesus talks about would be like ready to take on what he's giving us? And so I went through that. We talked about discipline. We read through the passage, and then we really got down to this place called stubborn hearts. Stubborn hearts, and when I say stubborn hearts, immediately I can think of other people. But at the end of the day, I want to address my stubborn heart. Why is my heart? Is my discipleship and my heart becoming more like Jesus, or is it becoming less like Jesus? Because that's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And I talked a lot in the message about just self-righteousness and just like letting people, like holding people to the fire, but then not holding myself to the fire. Meaning like, oh man, is my pride, is my self-righteousness keeping me away from God. And in the passage, it was the Pharisees who knew everything, knew all the things about God, but were so unlike God. And for those who have been in church for a long time, do we know so much about God and the history, the life, and yet are we more like him every day or less like him? And I think that's a question that we really need to ask ourselves. And finally, I talked about the work of the gospel leading us into Sabbath, and that at the end of the day, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. He is the Lord of rest, and that Jesus himself is our rest. There's so many directions I can go, but I'm telling you, as you and I live this life, we are going to want to find our rest in other places, find our rest in, if I can work hard enough, if I can do this, that, and the other thing hard enough, then I could find rest. If I could make enough, I'll find rest. If I find the right relationship, then I'll find rest. If I can fill in the blank. And I'm telling you, at the end of the day, only Jesus is our rest, and he will be our rest eternally.
Yeah.
And so I want us to continue or begin to turn to Jesus as our rest, trusting that his way is higher than our ways. We might not understand why he's doing this, but he's teaching us a way of life. And back to the quote, the truth of Jesus plus the way of Jesus gives us the life of Jesus. And that's a life that is light, that is a life that is joyful, that is a life that is connected to God in an honest way. And so that's pretty much how this message went through. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In this, what were some things that stood out to you in the message or in the passage, or maybe even the ideas around Sabbath? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I thought they're really good sections. I think you had three main ideas, right? That discipleship is important. It's a practice. It's something we have to put effort into. Mm-hmm. That self-righteousness can keep us from seeing what Jesus is really doing and being a part of that. And then that Jesus is our true rest.
Yeah.
And Hebrews actually talks about that, about Jesus being the Sabbath. And a lot of people have used that as an argument to say, well, we don't need Sabbath anymore. We don't need to practice that anymore. I would say while we're in these fallen physical bodies rather than renewed physical bodies, we still need rest.
Yeah.
Anyone who's tried to work overtime for months and months at a time, or do everything that your kids want to do, or whatever else, fill in the blank, and never take any rest, knows that you cannot sustain that life long term. And people who do often end up with emotional breakdowns, or having no connected relationships, or things like that.
Or sickness.
So for sickness, for human flourishing, we need rest. That's very clear. Now, what Jesus did very clearly say while he was here is that the Sabbath has an intention, that God's law about the Sabbath had an intention, and that many of the teachers of the law were building up this system of rules around it that took people away from that intention. Mm-hmm. The intention of Sabbath is like rest for our physical bodies, connection with God, delight, taking time to delight in creation and all of God's good gifts. Then how does making more and more rules actually create that?
To create, actually create real Sabbath.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I think that idea just stood out to me again. Am I, even as I continue to practice the rhythm of Sabbath, as we encourage the church to do that on Sundays, but you could pick a different day if that doesn't work for you. As we continue in that practice, where are we making rules that are not for those things flourishing? And where can we tweak things to say, this is what this day should truly be about, if the main intention is resting and worshiping and delighting? And how can I follow Jesus and see what he's doing in this practice of Sabbath? Because he may want to interrupt your day. He may want to
For
heal
sure.
somebody
Yeah.
in the synagogue. You know, he may want to do these things that we can be skeptical about.
Yeah.
And instead, we need to enter in and actually be a people who are so restful that the places we go, the people we engage in conversation can tell there's something different about them because they've been following that way of Jesus.
And I love being around people that are really just present. It's like, oh, I'm here.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not distracted. I'm not somewhere else. I'm not like gone.
Looking
I'm right
at my
here.
phone, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why Jesus was like really like mad. It says he was angry and distressed at the Pharisees for healing a man with a shriveled hand. And because like at the end of the day, and I said this in the sermon, at the end of the day, what is Sabbath for but to restore, to replenish, and to rebuild human beings and relationships? And like it was so that these people could finally be at peace, right? And this man with this shriveled hand, he was not at peace and he was in need, and Jesus was bringing like the understanding or the spirit underneath Sabbath to this man's life. And the people were upset because they broke the rules, because at the end of the day this man might have had a shriveled hand, but they had shriveled hearts for sure. And Sabbath was no longer what God intended. That's why Jesus said, you know, is Sabbath made for man or is man made for Sabbath? You know, he's like, hey, Sabbath was made for man. And so I wonder, even with us, and maybe you listening today, like, how is your heart? Is our heart shriveled up and in need of Jesus to really rescue us? Because a shriveled heart cannot see what Jesus is doing, or it might even get offended by what he's doing. And for our listeners, like when we even talk about a day of rest, a day of Sabbath, a day of stopping, a day of ceasing and being done, does that offend you? Does that make you upset? Like, or does that just like make your eyes roll because there's no way I got this and the other thing to do, when Jesus is trying to teach us a way of life that will be hard, that will be jiu-jitsu. He's trying to jiu-jitsu us, right? And we're like, there's no way. Let me do it my way. And then I always ask this question to myself and to us, is like, how's that going for you? And it's not, I don't say it as like a trying to be like trying to snap back, but I say it because sometimes we think, oh, my way. But then when we look back of how it's going for us, it's like, it's not going good. Maybe the way of Jesus is much better.
Yeah.
It's much better. And it just reminds me of that song Jen sings, like, your way is better, right? Your way is better. Teach me your way, Lord, because I've done it my way for a while, and your way is better. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about, like, maybe we really have set up idols in our lives, and idols are anything that we put our hope into, or anything that if it was taken away from us, we would feel like our lives are falling apart. Have we set up idols in our lives that we actually have been serving that is destroying us? And that could be very different for each of us, but I wonder what idols are actually like have been hurting us. And some of these idols have been taught by our parents or by
churches.
Or by churches or society at large, and it puts us in like fight or flight mode instead of a place of rest. And maybe even that in itself could be a sign.
Yeah. I mean, we were even talking about this morning, that whole idol of the American dream,
Yeah.
which can be enforced by churches a lot of times, that the goal in life is to make a certain amount of money, live in a certain type of house, have 2.5 kids, be married, have 2.5 kids. And that picture, it's not that somebody who fit all those parameters is doing something wrong, but making that the goal instead of living life with Jesus could really burn you out. Could you end up in a place in a lot of distress. And all those things aren't bad in and of themselves, but when they become the main thing, they do become an idol. Even like the Pharisees, you can make religious rules. If I have this perfect rhythm of my week, if I read my Bible every morning and I pray every night and I fast on Tuesdays and I rest on Sundays and I gather on Saturdays and I volunteer, if you are doing all those things because somehow you think that's what makes God love you more, or that's what God's gonna bless, it's not that those are bad things, but they become the main thing instead of doing them to draw closer to Jesus.
Oh man, it like when you even talk about it, it convicts me because I am one of those people that like I get into a structure and then I'm like, look how good this structure is, right? There was a moment in time I'd wake up at 4 o'clock to 4:30 in the morning so I could seek God and do all these things. And you know what? It was really good. But then at some point, like I wouldn't like deter from the structure because it became a part of my identity. Like, look how hard I'm working and what I'm doing for God, and then I lost the spirit of my desire to be with God so that I could just hit the numbers.
Well, and two really, I think, dangerous attitudes come out. I'm really familiar with this attitude is, look, God, I'm doing all this for you, so why aren't you blessing me? Why aren't you answering these prayers? I'm doing all this good stuff for you. Why aren't you answering these prayers? Or the judgmentalism of, well, if you would only do X, Y, and Z.
Being stubborn hearts.
Yeah.
I know. That's why I could see myself in these Pharisees.
Oh yeah, me too.
And like, I am the king of these stubborn heart moments, and God's probably replying when I wake up at 4:30, like, all right, I'm doing this for you. He's like, yeah, this is great.
Guess
you're
what?
with me.
You could also rest with me.
Like, you're with me, and like that was the best part. Instead of like, look how many days I did it in a row.
Right.
And like I got obsessed with the Bible app in that same way, like every day, this many notes and this many things.
I have a daily refresh every single day.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm not saying anything's wrong with that.
I think it's really important to have daily time with God, but it is the attitude of your heart, I'm doing this for you, or is it I'm doing it to be with you? Sky Jitani has a great book, it's been in publication for a long time now, called With.
Yeah.
And he just examines those attitudes of the heart, and one of them is for God. Everything you're doing is for God, when instead it should be with God.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you got some nuggets out of this. Join us for next week as we gather together, and God bless you so much.